couple years ago, me and two buddies decided to go camping out in Pisgah. Not at a designated campground. We hiked until the trail spat us out into a little clearing that had clearly been used before. A flattened patch, some old fire rings, a few battered tent stakes hammered into the earth. It felt private enough. It felt like the kind of place you could disappear into for a weekend and not be missed. We did everything right. We set up a small perimeter, stacked the wood, and hung our food way out on a high limb, the standard bear protocol stuff. Anything that could smell was separated from our sleeping area by a decent distance. We ate, laughed, and drank a little, the kind of quiet that builds in the middle of the woods where no one else is talking. Then the weather turned. Not slowly, but like someone switched a valve. Rain came down hard, steady, drumming sheets that turned the leaves silver and made the world a single sound. We zipped the tent up and collapsed. Sometime in the middle of the night, a crack of thunder like a thrown fist slammed close. My watch read something stupid, 2 a.m., maybe 3, and for a while the rain was the only thing I knew to be true. Then, above the wind and the rain and the steady slap of the rain on canvas, I heard voices. They were weirdly high-pitched and far off, like a recording playing through a cheap speaker at the edge of hearing. At first I thought maybe another group had wandered in, a family on a late hike, someone else camped sly in the dark. But the tone of the voices didn't fit. They sounded like little kids. Like 5 or 6-year-olds calling to one another, thin and urgent and laughing in that sharp, brittle way kids laugh when it's more surprise than joy. The laugh was the worst part. It was too light, like a bell in a long, empty hallway. I nudged the guy in the next sleeping bag. He was up, white-faced, eyes wide in the beam of the headlamp that I'd left clipped to the tent's top. He mouthed, "You hearing that?" I nodded because talking felt like the wrong thing to do. We lay there, listening, and the voices drifted closer, or at least it felt that way. They seemed to be coming from the direction of our food, that high tree where we'd hung the pack. For a second the brain tries rational things. Other campers, hunters, some weird animal noise. But the quality of it was too human, too thin. The laughter stopped. There was a pause in the rain where the world shifted. My heart did something dumb like try to leave my ribs. Then we heard footsteps. They were soft, careful, the wet leaves cracking under weight. At first I told myself it was a deer. Big feet. But deer don't make deliberate, single steps around a tent like someone is trying not to wake you. They don't break leaves in that careful, human cadence. The steps moved slow from one side of the site to the other. Close enough that I could hear each leaf flatten and drip. Close enough that I pictured a silhouette, a person with a flashlight, or worse. I was about to push my zipper back and peek when the steps stopped. Right outside our tent. I could swear the air changed, like the forest exhaled and held its breath for us. Then, without wind, without doors, the footsteps walked away. The sound retreated through the underbrush and dissolved into rain. We didn't move. We lay there so long our muscles cramped. Eventually the adrenaline thinned and with it the grasp of fear. We fell asleep in little fits, two guys ignoring the obvious and the other trying to pretend he hadn't heard it. In the morning we checked the food. It was exactly where we had left it, high in the tree, untouched. No evidence of anyone touching it. No footprints in the soft earth around our site except ours. We laughed then, awkward and brittle, the kind of laugh that's not really a laugh at all. We told ourselves we'd heard kids in the rain, or some animal making weird sounds, or that the thunder had played some trick on our ears. Rationalizations to cover the hair remaining on our skin. We left early, packed, and the silence of the trail felt enormous. We still don't talk about that night much. Every now and then one of us will mention something small, a laugh on a rainy night, the way the leaves break, and the conversation stops. Sometimes I wish I'd unzipped the tent and looked out. Maybe I would have seen a couple of kids lost in the dark and I'd have helped them. Maybe I would have seen nothing. Maybe the world would have folded neatly back into the rational. But other times I think about how quiet it was when that something stepped away, and I'm glad I didn't. There's a comfort in not knowing. There's a horror in the possibility that what walked around us on that wet night couldn't be explained away. The food was still hung high when we left, unmolested. We were careful after that, hung it higher, checked the trees, kept the headlamp close. But every time it rains now, my ears memory the cadence of those footsteps. The wet leaf, the small, careful pace, the slow moving away. Pisgah holds a lot of things, weather, animals, the weight of people who have gone before. That night it held something quieter and older than us, and for one sloppy, sleepless hour under a soaked canvas, we were very small. We'd gone hiking 1,000 times before. Same group, me and 3 other buddies. We grew up in these woods, cutting trails, climbing rocks, finding places no map ever marked. We weren't reckless. We always brought packs, water, whistles, even a weapon just in case. Not that we ever needed one, but it felt better knowing it was there. That day wasn't unusual. The weather was good, the terrain familiar, and we were miles away from the designated trails. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that sits heavy, only broken by our boots on leaves. That's when we saw him. Up ahead, maybe 50 yards, a man was leaning on a tree. One hand pressed against the bark, his body bent forward. At first glance, he looked injured, like he'd twisted an ankle or was catching his breath. But something was wrong. No gear, no pack, no water bottle, nothing that screamed hiker. Just a man in the woods, still as stone. We slowed, glanced at one another, and called out, "Hey man, you good?" Nothing. No wave, no grunt, no sign he'd even heard us. The forest seemed to lean in around us. We circled a little, fanning out but keeping distance. Maybe he was hurt, maybe he needed help. Another call, louder this time. Still nothing. That's when one of my buddies froze. His voice cracked out, sharp, loud enough to cut the air. "Weapon." We all snapped our eyes to the man. From our new angle, it was clear. He wasn't leaning for support. His hand gripped the tree like an anchor, and in his other hand, loose but deliberate, hung a massive knife, a machete. The word must have carried, because the second my friend yelled, the man straightened. Slowly. Uncoiling like something that had been waiting too long. He turned to face us. His face was blank, eyes unreadable, as if we weren't even people, just things he'd noticed. My other friend drew his gun, voice firm but shaking at the edges. "Hey man, we don't want any trouble. Don't come any closer." The machete man said nothing. No anger, no shout. He just took a step forward. Crunch. Pause. Another step. Crunch. Pause. It was deliberate, mechanical, like a game only he understood. My buddy with the gun shouted again. Louder. Commanding. I said stop. Don't come any closer. But the man didn't care. Step. Stop. Step. Stop. Each pause stretched like a noose tightening. The silence between us was unbearable, broken only by the wet shuffle of his boots. The friend who had gotten closest to him was already backpedaling fast, muttering under his breath, keeping his eyes on the blade. The rest of us mirrored him, slowly at first, then faster. Finally, my armed friend barked, "Go! Move!" And we didn't need to be told twice. We turned and ran. Heart pounding, lungs burning, the forest whipping by in a blur of branches and shadows. Every few seconds, one of us risked a glance back, terrified we'd see him breaking into a sprint, machete raised, grin on his face. But he never chased. Not that we saw. We didn't stop until the familiar parts of the woods gave way to something closer to safety, until our legs were jelly and our mouths were dry. We called it in, told the authorities there was some lunatic out there armed, silent, stalking. We gave them the location as best we could. To this day, none of us knows what his deal was. Maybe he was just some deranged loner. Maybe he thought we were trespassing. Maybe worse. But what rattles me most wasn't the weapon or the silence, or even the possibility of what might have happened if we'd stayed. It was his pace, that steady, patient rhythm. Step, stop, step, stop. Like he wasn't in a hurry because he knew, one way or another, the woods weren't going to let us leave. We went out for a day camping trip, me, my friend, and this guy she'd recently met online. It was one of those impulsive, small-town adventure plans that seemed fun until it didn't. We ended up in Montana, out in the absolute middle of nowhere. Miles of scrub, a sky so big it made you feel small, and not a single bar on the phone. Neither me nor my friend knew the land. We chased dirt tracks and shrugged at fenced pastures and finally decided to park and set up somewhere that looked flat enough. Her boyfriend was, let's say, big. Much bigger than either of us. Where we were small and quick, he was wide and slow like a human boulder. At first it just felt odd. Later, the odd would bloom into something darker. We rolled up to what looked like a promising clearing. My friend and I hopped out to scope it. He backed the truck up and then, without saying anything, just eased the transmission and drove off. We stood there, stupidly watching taillights vanish into dust. I called after him. My friend ran, waving, catching up to the truck about a quarter-mile away. He stopped. He didn't apologize. He said nothing. She laughed it off. Guess he didn't like that spot. That should have been a small, stupid red flag. We missed it. We found another place and I made sure he got out first before I stepped down. Small safety habit. My friend held the keys like it was part of a ritual. The mood shifted. He grew quiet, not the comfortable, brooding kind, but a clench of silence that felt like a held breath. He wouldn't help with the tent. He stood apart and then, without explanation, started walking away down a faint game trail. No pack, no purpose, just a slow, deliberate drift into the scrub. My friend jogged after him, trying to catch up. When she did, he turned and walked the other way. No words, no look, just turning his back as if to say, I don't care. It was childish in a mean way, but it felt like testing. Like he wanted to see how far the leash stretched before we tugged back. That's what got me worried. That's when I started planning an exit in my head. He came back and started rolling in the dirt, literally rolling around on his stomach, arms out like some wrong sunburnt animal. I asked my friend if maybe we should go. She waved it off, accused me of being dramatic, said I was ruining the vibe. She wanted to be polite, to not seem paranoid. I get it, she liked him and people do strange things when they like someone. But the rolling felt like an audition for something darker. It was erratic, unpredictable. It didn't fit the slow, indifferent man who'd been planting his feet like boulders 2 minutes earlier. Finally, she agreed we'd leave and we clambered into the truck with him still driving. We were headed back the way we came, the landscape a blur of sagebrush and sun. Out of nowhere he stopped. Not a pullover, but a slow, purposeless stop in the middle of an unmarked track. He shut the engine off and sat there. No music, no radio, just the truck ticking in the cooling air. Then he stepped out and started walking in circles around a pile of rocks and dead wood nearby, like he wanted to inspect something only he could see. I told my friend flatly, if he does anything that makes me think he's going to hurt us, I have pepper spray and I will use it. I said it loud enough for her to hear, and I wanted her to feel the hard edge of my voice. She tried to calm me. He came back, mumbled something about just checking it out, and slid into the seat like nothing had happened. He didn't meet our eyes. He didn't make a joke. He was small and sullen and odd. We drove away. Nothing else happened that day. No sudden lunges, no threats, no slammed doors. But the silence inside that truck smelled like danger. It smelled like a horizon line about to break. After we got back, my friend wanted to see him again. She texted him. She planned another trip. I didn't go. I told her I couldn't. She called it drama, insecurity, fear. She couldn't, or wouldn't, see what I saw. A man who tested boundaries without a glance, who watched us like a predator mapping exits. The end was slow. Distance and disagreements and the soft, inevitable dissolution of trust. Our friendship frayed because she wouldn't admit there was anything wrong. She kept making excuses. He'd had a weird childhood, he was shy, he didn't mean anything by it. Maybe some of that was true. Maybe he was harmless and just strange. But you don't get to feel that small, that exposed in a locked vehicle with a stranger and then want to go back for seconds. What haunts me about that day is not that we were in danger and somehow weren't harmed. It's that my instincts, the mundane little precautions I take because the world is weird, were right. The small moments mattered. The backing away without a word, the aimless circling, the rolling on the ground. Those are the things people call quirky, until they're not. If you ever find yourself alone out there with someone you don't really know, trust the small, ugly feelings. Keep the keys close. Hold the pepper spray where your fingers can find it. And if someone treats your safety like a suggestion, don't wait for them to decide it matters. Because the middle of nowhere has fine hearing for voices, especially the ones that call out for trouble. You don't need a gun to feel dangerous. Sometimes the danger is a man with an ordinary face who practices being unreadable. This happened about 6 years ago. As stated, I was about 12 and my brother was 26 at the time. My brother had been serving in the U.S. Army for several years when this happened and was deploying to the Middle East on his second deployment, if I remember correctly. Also of note was that he is a Green Beret and had recently, 3 or 4 months prior to this trip, completed the Army Special Forces qualification course, Robin Sage and all that, and by then was an active duty SF engineer sergeant. Definitely not someone you'd want to fuck around with. Given that we both grew up with a passion for the outdoors, he thought it would be nice to take me on a backpacking trip in northern Alabama, the Sipsey Wilderness for those familiar with the area, before he left for 9 months. The trip had gone smoothly up until the third night we were camping out. Around 8 p.m. we had our camp set up, eaten dinner, and were sitting by the fire talking about typical boy shit, guns, girls, etc. For some reference, our spot was about 50 yards from a large stream, and about 50 yards downhill adjacent to the large path. Our camp, the stream, and the path formed a triangle of sorts. This was summertime in Alabama, so it wasn't quite dark yet when 2 guys who looked to be in their late 20s wandered up and asked if we had seen any hogs while we were hiking around. Given that this is rural Alabama, we actually had seen some farther into the wilderness area and told them so. Even though they were relatively polite, my brother called them good old boys, I got a seriously creepy vibe from them: dirty clothes, greasy hair, scraggly facial hair, etc. I think they probably looked like they belonged in the movie Deliverance. They kinda hung out for a few minutes, maybe a little longer than they should have, looking around, asking us questions like how long we had been out there, how long we were staying, and what looked like them kinda sizing us up. They then abruptly said goodbye and walked away. I didn't necessarily feel threatened by them, and I know for sure my brother didn't, but I still felt uneasy about the whole thing. Fast forward 3 or 4 hours. My brother and I had gone to sleep and were nestled in our tent when I woke to the sound of multiple dogs barking. I've always been a heavy sleeper, and they sounded like they were only about 100 yards away. My heart immediately started pounding, and I kicked my brother through my sleeping bag and asked if he was awake/had heard the dogs. He responded, "I'm awake, they've been getting closer for the past hour or so. Just lay still and don't make any sounds." Needless to say, 12-year-old me was about to shit my pants. We would also hear sporadic shouts from several different sources, but neither came any closer. A few minutes later, my brother whispered, "They're just hunting for hogs. They use the dogs to pin them down and then they shoot them." This gave me some relief, but not much. Somehow I managed to fall back asleep. The fact that they were doing this at night was a huge red flag, my brother later told me, but I think he was just trying to keep me calm. Fast forward what was probably another 3 hours, around 2 a.m. I had managed to sleep pretty well after first hearing the hog hunters when I woke up to my brother squeezing my shoulder firmly, saying, "Wake up, put your shoes on quick and follow me, be as quiet as you can." My heart immediately went back to racing because I heard the dogs and voices in the distance, farther away than before but still distinct. Not asking any questions, I did what he said, and as soon as we were out of the tent he told me to get on his back. This was a breeze for him after rucking with God knows how much weight in the army. We snuck about 50 yards into the woods towards the junction of the path and the stream and crawled into some bushes. It was up a hill, so we had a pretty good elevated view of our campsite. I remember as we were laying there how loudly I was breathing and how quiet he was when I heard the very distinct sound of a pistol slide racking. I looked over and my brother had his pistol, a HK-USP that he gave to me a few years after this story took place, and was watching the campsite and surrounding area. I started to whisper to him when he put his hand over my mouth and pointed at the campsite. The group of hunters had been steadily approaching our camp, and by this time, 30 or so minutes, had reached it. There were 5 of them and like 3 or 4 dogs. They all looked relatively young, but 2 had either rifles or shotguns, and the dogs were going crazy, obviously having smelled our scent. For those of you who are backpackers/campers, nobody who comes up on a random camp in the middle of the night with dogs and guns and has good intentions. I knew this and my brother knew this. I was scared shitless. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but my brother later told me they were talking about us, although he hadn't heard any specifics either. They lingered for about 20 minutes, shining flashlights around and talking to themselves, when my brother put his mouth to my ear and said, "If they come towards, I want you to turn and run as quickly as you can. Don't stop, don't look back, stay off the trail and look for the flashing lights." I didn't know what he meant by this, but that'll come later. I knew I could make it back because he had taught me land NAV pretty well. He then handed me a flashlight and told me not to take the red filter off. He told me later that the red filter helps preserve night vision and cuts down ambient light, so it would be harder for someone to see from a distance. At this point I was so scared I almost started crying, but at the same time had a rush of adrenaline and what I think now was confidence that he thought I could handle myself. We laid there for a while longer when out of nowhere they started screaming, "Where y'all at?" and firing into the woods at random. My brother dragged me back behind the crest of the hill and threw himself on top of me. Thankfully, our position on top of the hill, we were protected from any gunfire. They shot maybe 5 or 6 more times and then started walking back the direction they had come. They got maybe 100 yards away when I heard a blaring siren and saw emergency lights flashing through the woods. Turns out my brother had called the Forest Service office on a satellite phone my family has for emergencies while I was asleep, and they had sent out Forest Service officers and game wardens to our area of the wilderness. The Sipsey Wilderness is about 25,000 acres in size, so it took them a while to get there on the dirt roads. When we saw the game warden truck, my brother signaled them with the light and pointed them in the direction the hunters had gone, and the guy sped off, shining his spotlight through the woods. As soon as they were all gone, we went back to our camp, packed up our shit, and waited by the path for the game warden to come back, who then gave us a ride in his truck bed back to the main staging area. On the drive back, my brother told me how brave I had been and that we would talk about it with our parents the next day if I wanted to. I asked him not to do that because I thought they might never let me go camp again. Creepy rednecks in the woods, let's not meet again, you might get shot next time. We never got any definitive information on what happened to the rednecks we encountered. I have many friends who have gone out to the Sipsey area and had a great time with no creepy stuff going on. However, it is truly a wilderness area, and law enforcement response, if you can even reach them, would be slow. I was lucky that my brother was there and reacted so quickly, otherwise who knows what could have happened. We also got lucky that whatever their intentions were, they either reconsidered or lost interest. I will note that when they left our camp, the game warden showed up pretty soon afterwards, but I didn't see what the guys and their dogs did. If I remember correctly, they headed in a direction parallel to the stream, away from the trail, inaccessible to any kind of vehicle. Maybe the warden continued on and took another trail to try and cut them off? We waited around 30 minutes for him to come back, and he said there were other officers out looking. There are only so many paths that you could take a truck or quad bike down, so any thorough search effort would also have to be done on foot.